A very good evening and warm welcome to all our viewers to yet another very informative and interactive panel discussion which is on ecological and economical value of public open spaces in cities. What is a public open space and how is it connected with the city health or the environmental factors? Let us find the answers from our renowned panel. With immense pleasure, we welcome our key players from the design industry. Architect Rishikesh Farke, New Arc Landscapes LLP, who is also our moderator for today's session. Architect Urmila Rajadhyaksh, HOD, Masters in Architecture, Landscape, LS Raheja School of Architecture. Architect Anal Vaishnav, Living Roots Environmental Design Studio. Architect Bhakti Thakur, Enviroscape, Landscape Design and Planning. Architect Ashish Teli. I hope we have a very enlightening session. Let us start with a short AV and thereafter Rishikesh sir will be taking it ahead. Thank you.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to the special web series by IDAC on landscape architecture. Role of landscape architecture stretches in different scales, namely personal space, community or a campus space, city level space, or we can call it as public spaces, and to a much larger scale at regional scale. However, today we are going to focus on public spaces and especially on ecological and economical value of these spaces in our cities. In this session, we would be analyzing public open spaces through the eyes and experience of landscape architects as well as architects and planners. To speak upon this topic, we have four eminent panelists and practitioners. Let me begin introducing them. Firstly, I would like to welcome Ms. Urmila Rajadhyaksh. She has immense experience of 30 plus years. She is HOD of LS Raheja School of Architecture, MArch department, which is MArch in landscape. And she is from Mumbai. Welcome, ma'am.
Hello, everybody.
Secondly, I would like to welcome architect Bhakti Thakur, again from Mumbai. She's practicing by name as a company name Enviroscapes, and she has 15 plus years of experience. Welcome to the panel discussion, Bhakti.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Third, now I would like to welcome architect and planner Anal Vaishnav, and she's practicing by a company named Living Roots and has an experience of more than 18 years. So welcome Anil for a panel discussion.
Thank you, Rishikesh, and good evening, everybody. Let's great question.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Welcome on panel. So I think let's begin with our discussion, and the questionnaire as far as today's topic, economical and ecological value of public open spaces in our cities. As a format for this program, what we have decided is we are going to raise 3 key questions to each panelist, and then we would like to have different opinions. There could be different opinions, there can be same opinions, but we definitely would like to capture and present different opinions of each panelist, how they think of these 3 questions. So let's begin with first question. My first question is how public open spaces are connected with cities' health. And when I make a statement of cities' health, it is not a very small topic, it's definitely a big topic. So let's begin getting answers from Urmila ma'am. Yeah. Over to you, ma'am.
So city health is often equated with medicine and medical facilities. Whereas what we've really seen and what's been brought home by this pandemic is that these are at best remedial measures. Healthy settings play a very important role in maintaining city health, and it's in this context that the important role of public open spaces needs to be understood. The major public health problems of today include chronic diseases, toxic exposure, injuries, and violence. Physical inactivity contributes to many chronic diseases, and public open spaces can provide opportunities for active recreation. Toxic exposure usually results from inadequate policies or inadequate implementation of existing policies. But what is not often understood is the role natural areas play in developing a city's resilience to toxicity and other such life-threatening factors and maintaining quality of life for its residents. Thus, having a sizable public open space in cities as natural areas maintains the city's health and its ability to provide a good life to its citizens. So it's also about how these public open spaces are designed and not just about their existence. Public open spaces also aids in mental restoration and hence a reduction in crime too. Their role in developing people connects, which is important for reducing negative emotions and blocking stressful thoughts. Public spaces, especially natural areas, have shown to have great benefits for children with attention deficit disorder. When parents of children with ADD were asked to nominate the activities they had found that made their children more manageable, public open spaces and natural areas were very much high on their list. Forest areas within the urban landscape can offer a stimulating external environment in which to play, resulting in healthier children, more able to deal with managed risk. In Scandinavia, children aged around 6 were found to develop balance and coordination much faster when playing in a forest than in a traditional playground. So play is crucial for many aspects of children's development, from the acquisition of social skills, experimentation, confrontation, resolution of emotional crises, to moral understanding, and cognitive skills such as language and comprehension, and of course, physical skills. And increasing urbanization has left our children with far fewer opportunities than previous generations to play freely outdoors and experience the natural environment. So good quality public spaces, including well-designed school grounds, can help fill this gap, providing children with opportunities for fun, exercise, and learning. Community gardens reduce crime in a residential neighborhood, and this has been observed around the world. Particularly in southern Ontario, Canada, a community garden was created on the site of an old rubbish dump, previously a place that attracted local criminals and used to be avoided by the 1,200 odd residents. And the conversion of it into the community garden made that a much more pleasant space, and the criminals were no longer there. What we may have sometimes observed is also something called a park breeze. When you move near an open space, the temperature drops and a pleasant breeze comes through. So the public open spaces can also provide this much needed air quality in a highly urbanized area. In all, it's what seemingly seems to be unconnected. That is, public health and public open spaces are interconnected, and it is this that we really need to understand.
Interesting. So basically what you're trying to suggest is when we talk about public health, it is nothing only with the physical health, but also a psychological and a social health of the city or a community too. Right. So let's listen to another opinion of on the same question from Bhakti. So Bhakti, over to you.
Yeah. So to answer the question related to public open spaces and the city health, I would like to take you through one of the examples that I really like in the city of Mumbai. This place is the Horniman Circle Garden, which is an urban green in a business district. And what I like to talk about this is the fact that the way it sits in the entire surroundings, it does make sure that it acts more and contributes towards the social health of the city. So what I'm going to be talking about is public open spaces and the social health of the city. Public urban green spaces provide neutral spaces within which people come together, they interact, and they also come from different backgrounds and age groups. These spaces contribute towards individual benefits as well as community building. Open spaces play a vital role towards building socio-cultural relationships or associations with the city. The importance of open spaces remains significant irrespective of the land use, residential, commercial, or institutional. And multifunctional, multi-use open spaces along with robust connectivity can contribute towards building a healthy city. So when I look at I would here want to stress the importance of social health in a city. It is not just about your mental health or your individual physical health, as much as it is about how we live together as a community. And I think open spaces really contribute towards it. And there's something called social resilience, which is also extremely critical when we are in situations like this, when we are we are facing a pandemic, especially just now currently, or even when we have some natural disasters. I think it's very important that we show social resilience, and hence according to me, this factor is equally important when it comes to the health of a city.
I was about to say that which is the other best time to we as citizens realize the social value of public open space, and everybody is locked down for last 2.5, 3 months, that we are not able to meet in a public open space, and then we may start feeling loneliness. This is the only way how we are getting connected, but still we are missing that public congregation areas. So let's listen from Anil about this topic. Over to you, Anil, your opinion.
A very relevant question, Rishikesh, especially in today's context, when we are all fighting with this, rising global crisis and the pandemic situation. As you can see, I have organized my presentation on this theme, public landscapes that heal and harvest. I would like to bring in here a very fresh perspective from a child's worldview. This is a painting by a 7-year-old son who sees the world very differently than we adults. As you can see, home is the center of his universe, but it is surrounded by lots of non-human species like plants, animals, birds, butterflies, trees, water, energy, fragrance, food, wind, soil, and whatnot. So his world really revolves around all of this. It's an inclusive world whereby nature is a living landscape, a landscape that breathes, that heals and harvests. To this, I'm also reminded of an article that I had read by Silke Helfrich, where he says, let's reimagine the urban commons in 2040. He says, I am because you are, and I am through the others. He talks about human relationships and their relatedness. He imagines the future city and its public spaces as an ever-changing paradox. Each change of this kind, he says, is an opportunity to communify the urban landscapes of the city and rethink their use for creating co-shared open spaces. He imagines an edible city with experimental gardens, herbal commons, community gardens, intercultural gardens, community supported agriculture with pool and share approach, cultural spaces like the reading circles, open theatre, contemplation area, library, open permaculture, commoning school, shared mobility options. Now, many of these open spaces are just open spaces with non-determined uses. Such integrated urban landscapes are very well-distributed systems. They are accessible to all. They are non-discriminative by nature and thereby are socially healing. They are healthy to live in for all age groups, gender, and kids as well. So here, as we discuss urban health and public spaces, I would like to cite a very important example that we got a chance to work on, which is repurposing landscape, as I say, from environmental nightmare of Ahmedabad's largest dumping grounds spread on an 80-acre site to a nature fun-filled public park. It has about 85 lakh metric tons of waste which is dumped there, causing all kinds of environmental issues like hazardous air pollution. It is susceptible to constant fires and smoke. It is contaminating the groundwater. So its revamping strategy really involved lining method of scientific closure, and it involved creating a layered system of attractive greenways on the top, marked by drought-tolerant species, instead of water-intensive, high energy consuming maintenance grasses. So the idea is that nature is treated as a healing strategy. The idea of healthy public spaces is that of being adaptive, being inclusive, being lively, being enjoyable, being comfortable, and above all, nature-filled for all of us. Thank you.
Interesting, Anal. I just want to ask that one line you mentioned, which I just wanted to note. Landscape is all about living.
Living landscapes, I said.
Okay, that was an interesting line. I thought I'll just ask you again. Something is of living landscapes. Anyway, so that was a good input, Anal. We'll move to the next participant. Ashish, what do you think of city health and the relation of landscape with it? Your opinion, please.
Okay, so I feel that the landscape has a major relevance with the health of people, because normally what happens is that people are kind of concerned with their own space, their own garden, their own backyard, their whatever. But if you kind of look at the larger picture, you know, this landscaping and the trees and the fauna and the trees bring a lot of calmness to people's mind. And basically India is a very, very hot country. So I think the importance of these large trees, important of them being planted properly and thoughtfully really helps. I mean, you're coming back from work, you are tired, you are stressed, and you kind of walk under the tree, or you kind of walk through a park, and you kind of see some beautiful lake, some beautiful stream, some lovely trees, some nice fragrance, and I think it automatically helps you de-stress. It automatically makes you calm. So I think this is a very major importance of kind of having a very planned garden and very planned cityscapes, you know, where also, you know, I think for children, I mean, you know, unfortunately, this country doesn't have too many areas where, you know, but the kids can kind of play, the kind of, you know, for the older generation, old people, like how they can kind of unwind, how they can kind of go and sit and enjoy among their group of people. So all this is kind of very important, and this can be done by kind of really planning the streets, planning the small areas, but planning large gardens in the city, and it gives you an opportunity where you know, you kind of have you know, all sorts of age group coming there and enjoying the garden, enjoying the trees, enjoying the flowers, enjoying the lawn, enjoying the water bodies, lotus, and this also brings a lot of birds and a lot of you know, butterflies and stuff like that. So I think this really helps to build up the whole you know, areas around you in such a way that gives you happiness. It also kind of gives you some kind of satisfaction, some kind of calmness. So I think this is all important for health of people in the city, in the country.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Well, that was a very interesting answers by everybody for my first question. So I think the second question is very important for the sustainability of all these public open spaces, and that is how good public spaces impact economy on the surrounding neighborhood. So I think let's begin understanding this answer from Urmila ma'am.
Rishikesh, that was an extremely interesting question actually, because public spaces are often perceived as city level spaces. However, high quality public spaces can have a significant impact on the economic life of urban centers, big or small, and are therefore an essential part of any successful regeneration strategy, including that in neighborhoods. As cities increasingly compete with one another to attract investment, the presence of good parks, squares, gardens, and other public spaces becomes vital for neighborhoods. Here, I'd just like to mention a term called placemaking. Placemaking refers to the process of planning quality public spaces. And placemaking is an essential aspect of creating local identities, and in turn, this influences land value. So, by nature, real estate value refers to the value of the land, and the implementation or upgrading of public spaces has the potential to influence the dynamics of real estate market in the region. So the renovation of these spaces therefore aims to improve residents' quality of life and attract new economic activities. Evidence from Japan showed that tree-lined streets, parks, and other green spaces even enhance the sense of community and attachment to a particular neighborhood. And they actually help people live longer. So almost 70% of the people lived till almost 70 years of age, and the probability of their living for a further 5 years was linked to their ability to take a stroll in local parks and tree-lined streets. Good public spaces also promote neighborliness and social inclusion. They bring people together from different ages and cultures and help to create a real sense of neighborhood. Comparatively, bland spaces and housing estates do not offer the same opportunities for social cohesion as more personal spaces do. So a good public landscape thus offers very clear benefits to the local economy in terms of stimulating increased house prices as well as raised property prices. Now, Shanta Gokhale, in her compelling portrait of one of Mumbai's oldest and most vibrant neighborhoods, Shivaji Park, describes it as being conceived in order to decongest the megacity's residential and commercial center after the plague epidemic of 1896. However, with its massive ground or Maidan named after the Maratha warrior king, gorgeous Art Deco buildings, and the great Arabian Sea beyond, Shivaji Park was a coveted residential area long before Bandra and Juhu and continues to be so. The Carter Road precinct, which is seen in this picture, was a quiet and increasingly desolate and with a sense of crime coming into it, a kind of a neighborhood before this promenade was developed. The development of this promenade, however, has brought about a sea change, and now Carter Road is a high-flying neighborhood with a lot of local economies, including eateries, local and even international, and doesn't look back to its past anymore. Thank you.
So it seems, ma'am, that whatever it stands true for last 120 years at least, that public spaces are a very great magnet of economic development in the neighborhood. You cited an example of Shivaji Park, which was 1896. Am I right?
Yes. After the plague of 1896.
After the plague of 1896. So that means for last 125 years, we have a living example how a nice and central public open space has impacted economy all around. And we are all aware, at least in Mumbai, what are the land prices as far as surroundings of Shivaji Park are.
Completely.
Right. So let's listen from Bhakti. Bhakti, so this same question goes to you in terms of how it impacts on the economy of the surrounding. Yeah.
So, while we just heard the example of Shivaji Park from Urmila ma'am, I would like to take you all to another example, which is a gated community, and it is called Magarpatta city in Pune. This is a master plan in which we again see a central green, which is huge in its size. I mean, it's somewhere around 20 acres. And what one sees is a complete set of integrated township planning, which has been proposed over here and which is already functional here. And we see a lot of residential use. We see IT parks, we see a lot of offices and commercial uses. So this is open spaces and economy of neighborhood. There are several townships which have been proposed around Pune. I cited an example just now of the Magarpatta city, which are following the integrated township planning guidelines. Most of these gated community developments have given landscape and open space planning equal importance. I mean, it's not only about residential units, or it's not about commercial and IT development or malls or shopping centers, but they have given, in fact, a lot of prominence and importance to landscape and open spaces. Open spaces, roads, intersections, all have been integrated to create a walkable neighborhood. Walkable neighborhood is, that is, you walk to office, you walk to park, you walk to school, you walk to hospital. And what one sees in this particular case, I mean, be it Magarpatta or be it Amanora city or any other development of that kind, one sees that the real estate value in these neighborhoods is much higher than the developments which are in the immediate surroundings. So while it is important to understand the importance of open spaces and how they contribute to the economy, I think the developers have realized it, and it's important that even the government starts realizing it and give it an equal importance. While they have made enough rules, the government development control rules in Mumbai or in any of these cities do give you a specified percentage based on which you need to leave the open spaces. But I think there is a lot left to be done when it comes to connecting these open spaces, because the minute you set a connectivity, I think you will really add to the value of the entire neighborhood rather than looking at these open spaces in isolation. So I think both these aspects have to be very well addressed, and that will definitely add to the economic value of the neighborhood, be it a gated community or be it a community developed by the government.
I think you seem to be very, very optimistic towards the open spaces, the way government will promote our open spaces in future, because as you rightly said, developers as well as governments, different level governments have realized the importance of that. So can I ask you a quick question in terms of this walkable neighborhoods? Would you like to a bit enhance further on the scale of this walkable neighborhoods in terms of dimensions? What are normally size of this walkable neighborhood is considered as? It's somewhere between 1.5 to 2 kilometer walk, wherein you can generally take a walk from your residence to the workplace or a school or a hospital or anywhere in a span of about 15 to 20 minutes walk maximum. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, the walkable neighborhood is defined with this particular distance, 1 to 2 kilometers from your house to the office or to the park or to the school, and that is how nowadays these communities are being built, or they have been created, so to say, by the developers. And the minimum requirement for these kind of township is 100 acres and above. So you obviously have the potential to correctly plan, and as I said, stress equal importance on roads and intersections, because quite often we do not end up talking about these connectivities, and they play a equally important role, right from having a bicycle track to having a good footpath. I think all these will really make a good neighborhood, and all this is going to translate into a high real estate value. I mean, this is a proven fact. There is absolutely no debate in that.
Perfect. Okay, so we just take opinion from Anil about the economical value question. Anil, over to you.
Yeah. I'm very glad that both the speakers came up with a very strong connection between the idea of economics and life, because most of the time this is a very undermined or often a neglected subject when we talk about, especially public spaces. So I see this notion of economics slightly different herein in the realm of how a sensitive city planning provides for a good restructuring of public spaces that are productive in nature. Herein, I would like to cite a very brilliant planning example of late modernism, the city of Islamabad, the then new capital of Pakistan in 1960s, designed and planned by the Greek architect, planner, ecologist, thinker of human settlements, Doxidas. He imagined the city as an economic diagram, as you can see in the doodle below, whereby nature is its primary driver. He says that the productive landscapes of the city, agrogrids and agrofarms, and the ecological landscapes, which are basically the natural ravines, the urban forests, which are running in the form of eco corridors for flora and fauna, both these grids pretty much structure the public landscape of the city. As you can see in this master plan, the city is divided into a gridiron pattern of macro and micro grids of 10-minute walking distance, which is intercepted by this natural ravinous kind of terrain of wild forest and ecosystems which run and cut across the city. So the plan of the city has been made keeping the human in the center. The plan of the city allows for complete freedom for human beings from the car, from the mechanization. So the design of its public spaces is also made very adaptable. It allows for low cost gradual expansion. So as the city will grow, as the demand will grow, as the traffic will grow, as the densities will increase, the large ROWs will keep getting restructured, while the rest of the ROW will be still given back to the city in the form of regenerative gardens, urban agriculture, fruit farms, and such. So green, as you can see here, is seen as the fundamental organizing principle, a functional ground to really shape the socio-economic landscape of the city. The other brilliant example of good design of a public space, which makes great business sense, is that of a Highland Park in New York. Once upon a time, it was an abandoned railway line, is now a throbbing public place. It has attracted a lot of international tourism, and it has become a very successful economic model for other cities to replicate. It has been able to raise almost $220 million, both in public and private domains. It has been able to attract a lot of real estate in and around its vicinity. About 29 new projects have got added since Highline has happened. About 700,000 square feet of fun retail and office spaces have got added up. A lot of hotel rooms have come up in its vicinity. And it's really become a very, very vibrant, lung throbbing, part of the city. So this park really has set up an unprecedented example of design innovation, whereby I had read in a book called Design Does Matter. So good design does mean good business for a lot of people. So basically what I want to drive at is that many a times it makes just more economic sense to transform these old, unused, defunct pieces of infrastructure which are lying otherwise redundant in the city into such great place-making initiatives instead of just tearing them down. So that's really the perspective I want to bring it here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, interesting example of Islamabad, Anil, surely. So do you have a quick opinion on what you meant by urban farming or urban agriculture? And do you see that that's going to be an upcoming trend as far as Indian urban cities are concerned?
Sure. Rishikesh, a very important idea, I think. See, a lot of our cities have negative voids or urban voids, so which are basically, neither lying completely in the private territory, not lying in the public domain. So such spaces, are really potential spaces where you can convert them into functional landscapes. So be it urban forest or be it a piece of urban agriculture where people can engage, where people can negotiate, where people can reap, harvest, some kind of benefits. Such landscapes then can become community owned, can become community seeded, can become community managed, and therefore really become more and more sustainable. Plus, water is going to be a big problem in future. All of our cities are going to, face this scarcity. So it's time that we start thinking of converting a lot of our manicured landscapes also into these functional landscapes, so that they do not just remain referential in nature, but there is a chance to negotiate with these landscapes, to engage more.
I think,
uh,
yeah, please go ahead.
yeah, so what I was saying, more proactively, both young and old.
There is a lot of research which is going on the supply chain of farm products to be provided to urban areas, and how by reducing and promoting urban farming, how we can cut down the carbon footprint by just reducing the supply chain. It's interesting to see. Let's have another opinion from our next panelist. Ashish,
Yeah.
what do you think about how much is the impact of economy, impact of open spaces or landscape open space, public open spaces on the economy of the surrounding, or economy of the entire neighborhood? What are your thoughts about it?
See, I think but what is important here is that economy is kind of how people behave, how people interact, how people react to different things. And I think this I mean, when you have an open space, when you have this large lawns, when you have this gardens, I think I mean, you come back from office, very tired, you are very stressed, and then you just kind of say, okay, before going to home, I'm just going to take a stroll in the garden, maybe sit on a bench, maybe I read a book. I think it really helps you calm down to a great extent. So that is the major thing I feel that will help people build up a very healthy lifestyle. Now, I mean, you have areas where you probably can go for a jog, you kind of unwind in the evening, go with your friends, go with your children. So all these things are necessary. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have too many beautiful parks, we don't have too many beautiful lakes in this country, and that is what I think one should try and build and try and create areas where one can go there and kind of de-stress mostly.
Interesting session which is going on, so varied answers for the similar question. So let me put the third question to all of you. My third question is, which environmental factors are considered while designing these public open spaces by designers or landscape architects? So again, we will begin with Urmila ma'am. So there must be different set of factors you must be considering while designing such public open spaces. So we would like to hear more from you. Over to you, ma'am.
Rishikesh, when I'm answering your question, you have to forgive me a bit. I'm an academic, so I'm tending to go into a little beyond the environmental factors, because explaining environmental factors usually relates to a particular site. And we landscape architects regard design as a process. So rather than the factors themselves, which vary from site to site, I thought I would go one step more inside what drives those factors, and that's about the ecosystems that we live in. So we as landscape architects are trained to recognize that natural ecosystems have a very important role to play, and that is in terms of the ecosystem services that they provide. So any design that we do takes into consideration these 4 types of services that ecosystems provide. The first is very simple, all of us know it. They're called provisional services, and these are services like fruits, vegetables, trees, fish and livestock. And other services, provisional services, also include drinking water, timber, wood, fuel, materials that can be made into clothes and medicines, and so on and so forth. So another kind of services that ecosystems provide are regulating services, which are very important in terms of life being possible. So plants clean air, filter water, bacteria decompose waste, bees pollinate flowers, and tree roots hold soil in place to prevent erosion. And all these processes work together to make the ecosystems clean, sustainable, functional, resilient to change, and livable. So cultural services is the third one. And this is as we humans interact and alter nature, in turn, the natural world alters us as well. And over years, this has guided our cultural, intellectual, and social development by being a constant force which is present in our lives. Literature stands evidence to this. So the importance of ecosystems to the human mind can be traced back to the beginning of mankind. A cultural service is a non-material benefit that contributes to the development and cultural advancement of people, including how ecosystems play a role in local, national, and global cultures. The building of knowledge and the spreading of ideas, creativity born from interactions, and so on. The fourth is, in fact, the most important, and these are the supporting services. These are the most fundamental ecosystem services, but not often recognized as such. Ecosystems themselves can't be sustained without the consistency of underlying natural processes like photosynthesis, nutrient recycling, and the creation of soils and the water cycle. These processes allow the earth to sustain basic life forms, let alone whole ecosystems and people. Without these supporting services, provisional, regulating, and cultural services wouldn't exist. So landscape architects incorporate these in their works across scales. And these are often recognized as the basis of the environmental factors that landscape architects work with. Thank you.
So it seems what you have given us as an input is a basis and a foundation upon which all these other environmental factors are to be considered, or these regulatory services are based upon. So likewise, what you have mentioned about the water cycle, do we consider any other cycles as a part of ecosystem?
Nutrient cycles, carbon cycle, hydrogen cycle, nitrogen cycle, all rock cycles, soil cycles, all the entire ecosystem is cyclic. So almost everything about it is cyclic.
It seems I'll have to take a separate webinar or a timing for understanding much in detail about all these cycles. Thank you, ma'am. That's really very, very core to the entire subject as what you have presented. Let's listen from the next participant about ecological factors, what she thinks of. So let's begin. So what is your opinion, Bhakti, about these environmental factors you consider while designing such open spaces?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So while answering to this question, I would like to take our viewers through one of the projects that our office is doing currently. This is again a gated community development, and we are looking at a mixed land use, which is residential, commercial, institutions, as well as open public spaces and parks. One of the first things that we did was we had an extremely thorough site study. So when we meant site study, it was also about understanding the topography and the way the water was flowing, because this site is adjoining the river, and it was very important for us to understand the hydrology of the entire site. Also, we have done a lot of aerial surveys through drone, so that we could map the vegetation. And if you could see in one of these images, we've actually marked and we've visually been able to, very clearly define the way the stream was flowing from the land towards the water. And what we've done in this particular project is that we've developed our entire open space around this particular stream, and we call it a ravine because it is kind of forming it's kind of eroding into the land as well. The river is also backflowing and eroding into the land, and it is a natural depression that has been created over several years. So this has been our the first starting point of understanding the environmental factors, which is very, very site specific. And I think every site which a landscape architect gets, be it big or small, be it maybe 100 acres or 5 acres, I think it's extremely important to understand these natural factors very, very clearly. And they should become the starting points towards zoning, when it comes to doing the entire master plan. And here we were very fortunate that we worked very, very closely with the master planners and the urban designers, wherein we could really integrate our thought processes correctly into the project. So further, in continuation with what I explained earlier, studying the topography and the hydrology, and of course the soil conditions of a given particular site, we also had a lot of existing tree cover which we had to retain, and also some of it which was not good and which was invasive and which were weeds. So what we had to be removed. So what we have gone ahead and done is actually documented each and every tree, and we've had this tree census done along with the required information on the girth and the sizes of the trees. And we have gone ahead and also documented the biodiversity when it comes to birds and animals. Maybe reptiles or even little small creatures that are the butterflies that are there. And also what we have proposed in this particular case is a very rustic looking forest like open space. So the notion which people have about open spaces being very large and being open and not having lawns or having a lot of play areas around it, this is not going to be designed, or this is not going to be has not been imagined to be that kind of a open space. This is going to be extremely natural, and what we will try to do is restore this particular land, because we do see that there's a lot of degradation that has happened in terms of the forest, and from a very healthy forest this has got deteriorated into a very weed dominant and invasive species dominant kind of forest. So the entire process here will take us at least 5 to 6 years or even 10 years, wherein we will be doing these kind of restoration activities in stages, and we'll be monitoring them as well. So the whole idea about this kind of space, open space specifically in this particular development that we are looking at, is going to be very rustic and natural. It's not a very manicured landscape.
Okay. So Bhakti, it's an interesting example which is not in an urban context or urban setup. So, and also it seems a very, very extensive pre-designed study. Before you must have actually gone to the design board for taking.
Yes.
So I think it seems that by this example that there is a lot of survey and the variety of surveys you must have carried out to take that cue and a data for designing. By the way, where is this location? It seems a very interesting and scenic site.
This is Pune. This is outskirts of Pune.
Outskirts of Pune. Okay, interesting. Thank you, Bhakti. Let's take opinion on same from our next panelist. So Ashish, while designing these beautiful public open spaces,
yes,
which are the environmental factors you consider while designing?
See, first and foremost, I think that, one has to use very indigenous trees. You need to kind of, use things which are very local. So, we have some beautiful trees in this country. And I have a feeling that if you kind of use them, I know which are, big trees, things that very easily grow, it really helps, and also the trees that grows in the region. So, depending upon where you are designing a garden, whether it is Gujarat, whether it is Maharashtra, whether it is Bangalore. So every region has their own trees, and that really brings the environment, because the local species, the local birds and everything kind of comes on the tree. It also grows much more easily, and so there is not much of stress, and I think you can kind of create things without too much of maintenance involved, because public spaces, I personally feel that doesn't require too much of maintenance. It has to be something which is very, very local. And also you have to kind of keep the weather in mind, that, where you are doing it. If it's kind of, in a place like Ahmedabad, obviously Ahmedabad is very hot for 8 months. of the year. And you kind of design something where there are more trees and then open lawn and whatever, it really helps, because that will really bring the temperature down. That will also kind of the plant will grow much more easily. So I think that the main thing is that the selection of the trees and selection of the material also, like when you are doing the pathways and we are doing the walkways, try and use more local material, encourage local people. I mean, develop, do things which are which is more kind of locally available, rather than kind of trying and getting things which are not really very easy to get. I mean, the stones, the plasters, everything has to be with the local craftsmen. So you kind of also provide them more opportunity to kind of do things.
It's an interesting insight, Ashish. And
Sorry?
It's an interesting insight.
Yeah.
About your point of view. Thanks for that. So we'll just like to listen to your opinion as far as these topics are concerned.
Sure.
Let's take you to the presentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. So I see this context as a classic conflict between green over gray or gray over green. I'll explain how and what I understand by gray and green. Unfortunately, the perceived value of gray infrastructure, as I call it, which is basically buildings, utilities, and roads, is overrated in our worlds. While the intangible value of the green infrastructure, which is basically trees, grasses, shrubs, parks, forest, gardens, streets, and the blue infrastructure, which is the natural landscape of the place, including rivers, lakes, ponds, water channels, is quite undermined when we talk about gray infrastructure. So I see the urban forest as the backbone of cities' green and blue infrastructure. They provide pretty much corridors and avenues and act as sponges to maximize the city's environmental footprint. I would like to show you here one of the projects that we have been lucky enough to work on, where we were able to design continuous forest parks as green lifeline of the city around a 15-kilometer long utility tunnel, which was basically an infrastructure corridor for it to convert into a continuous pedestrian artery running through the city. So these forests have been designed as natural ecosystems around these arteries, and these are biodiverse forests. These are 100% native forests designed around different themes like flowering forest, fruit and nut bearing forest, herbal and medicinal forest, wild deciduous and evergreen forest. So different thematic positions have been covered in and around the city. But basically the idea is to fill in all the voids that are there, as you can see in the aerial view here, around the utility tunnel with this continuous forest park, so that this become really, green lifeline of the city. So originally what happens is that a wasteland, otherwise a wasteland, is now converted into a very healthy soil ecology. The soil structure gets rejuvenated. The ecology of the place starts, getting more and more rejuvenated. These forests also help in holding the soil erosion, which was otherwise a ravinous land, because it is along the riverscape. These forests also act as windbreakers. They harvest water, they purify the air, they filter the light, dust and noise, and also, of course, reduce the heat gain. So over years, basically such functional landscapes create a very symbiotic relationship and allow the flora and fauna of the place to come back. And thereby sustainability does not just remain a cerebral concept in mind, but it realizes on ground. So here I would like to leave back a thought to all the listeners that doesn't it really make sense to convert, some of these conventional landscapes of manicured lawns and ornamental species by these functional landscapes wherever possible, not really everywhere, but wherever possible. One of the other favorite examples, international examples on the same lines, is the river restoration project in downtown Seoul. So unlike the Highline Park that I mentioned earlier, which was more like a a project which tried to rejuvenate or live with whatever is there and kind of, refurbish. Here, the city took a very harsh stand of demolishing a elevated flyover and uncover the historic context of the river stream, give back the river to the city, and really revive the lost ecology of the city along a 3.6-mile corridor right in the heart of the city. So what really brought is that it really rejuvenated a lot of environmental parameters, and it brought home many plant species and a very rich biodiversity in terms of fishes, in terms of aquatic invertebrates, amphibians, mammals. So all this started coming back. And of course, it also brought a lot of other environmental goodness in terms of reduced traffic, evaporative cooling effect, flood protection, reduced SPM levels, increased wind speeds. So the idea is that if we start weaving nature back to our urban lives, a fine balance of gray, green, and blue is achieved. Another very, before I wrap up my point of view, another very dear project which, we were very lucky enough to work in early 2008 is the revival of a redundant lake park, 200-acre lake park right in the heart of the city of Calcutta. This was again a very interesting example because it really was mobilized by a lot of community funding, a lot of media interest, a lot of young students of Shanti Niketan who came together to do sculpture installations. The city government came up to give their uprooted tram cobbles to do the pavements. The dredging of the lake was done. So it really, like a small pilot initiative that you are seeing here, really initiated a process of rejuvenation of that entire 200-acre lake park, and it set the ball rolling. So the idea is that, if the intentions are right, if the project is done with the right, backup of surveys and environmental studies, it really becomes a very happy, inviting place and a very collective place for all. The last but not the least, I would want to wrap up my point of view with this very interesting slide, because when we read our religious texts, or even when we see the historic paintings, be it miniature paintings or Pichwai style of paintings, or even visit the sacred groves which were left, which are a very important historic ecosystem lineages left by our ancestors for us, we see that nature was very integral part of our culture, our daily life celebrations, our festivals. So the idea is that good public spaces have these ingredients. They are really living landscapes, and they are very adaptive in nature, very resilient in nature. They connect with our culture. They are deeply rooted to the place, and they are, mind you, for the collective goodness of all. So not just human species, but the entire ecosystem. And thereby they connect with the soil, they replenish the Mother Earth, and therefore the outcome is something which is very livable, enjoyable, and that's where happy communities thrive forever. So as landscape professionals, let's really weave nature back into our public landscapes, because these public landscapes are really the opportunities to improve the ecological and socio-economic health structure of our societies at large. So that's where I would want to end. Thank you.
Interesting, because many a time for every given project, maybe the design elements are the body of the project. However, the narrative what you built, and I think interesting takeaways, the two words what you have mentioned as far as environmental goodness and a collective goodness can become interesting points to build a narrative for any given project.
Yeah.
So I think we come almost to the end of this webinar, because we are short of time. So friends, I could capture only 3 questions. This itself would give depth and spread of landscape architecture. only in one subject of public spaces. I thank all panelists for their valuable inputs and time. We stop here today, surely to come up with more topics which provide another dimension to architecture. Thank you again for all panelists, and good night.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rishikesh.
Yeah. Thank you,
I
Ida.
hope-
Thank you,
Rishikesh.
Idek, and thank you, Rishikesh.